You don't look like a real soldier. Let me see some ID.
I'm a sergeant in the U.S. Army. I'm in uniform.
Anyone can wear that. People like you don't serve this country.
I'm on duty. I'm headed to the Pentagon right now.
The sun was already high in the sky, bright and warm, like it had big plans for the day. Oak Street was quiet, the kind of quiet you only find in small American towns, where everybody thinks they know everybody else. Birds sat on electric lines. A few cars passed by slowly. At the corner of Oak Street stood a small gas station with faded red letters that read Miller's Fuel and Go. The pumps were old, but still worked fine. The smell of gas mixed with fresh morning air. Sergeant Joe Stevens pulled his dark green car beside pump number 3. He stepped out calmly, wearing his full U.S. Army uniform. His boots were clean, his shirt was pressed, his name tag shined in the sunlight. Joe was a black man in his early 30s, tall, calm, and focused. He looked at his watch and sighed lightly. He was running a little late, but not too late. Today was important, very important. Joe was scheduled to report to the Pentagon that morning. Not just any meeting, a serious one. Something big was happening, and they needed him there early. He had been called in the night before. No long explanations, just one sentence. We need you here first thing in the morning. That alone told Joe this was not a normal day. Before I go on, let me pause right here. If you're watching this right now, comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the U.S. or somewhere else in the world? Don't forget to like this story, subscribe for more, share it with someone, and hype this up so others can see it too. Your support means everything. Joe slid his card into the pump and began filling his tank. He hummed softly to himself, thinking about the meeting ahead. His mind was busy. He didn't notice the police car at first. It rolled in quietly and stopped a few feet behind him. The engine stayed on. The door opened. "Hey, you there." Joe turned around slowly. A white police officer stood by his car, one hand resting near his belt. The officer's name badge read Officer Daniel Brooks. His face was tight, like he had already made up his mind about something. "Yes, officer?" Joe said calmly. "What are you doing here?" Officer Brooks asked. "Buying gas," Joe replied, confused but respectful. Officer Brooks looked Joe up and down. His eyes paused on the uniform. Then he laughed. Not a friendly laugh, a sharp one. "That's funny," the officer said. "You don't look like a real soldier." Joe blinked. "Sir?" "I said you don't look like a real soldier," Brooks repeated. "People like you don't serve this country like that." The words hit hard. Joe felt them, but he stayed calm. Years of training had taught him that. "I am a sergeant in the U.S. Army. My name is Joe Stevens. I'm on my way to the Pentagon right now." Officer Brooks shook his head. "Nah, I don't buy it. Uniforms can be bought. Anyone can wear one." Joe slowly reached into his pocket. "I have my military ID." "Don't move," Brooks shouted. People nearby stopped. A man getting coffee froze. A woman in her car watched with wide eyes. Joe's heart started beating faster, but he kept his hands where the officer could see them. "Officer, please, I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to get to work." "To work," said Brooks. "You expect me to believe that?" Brooks stepped closer. "Step away from the pump. Turn around." Joe hesitated. "Am I being detained? I've done nothing wrong." "That's enough," Brooks snapped. "You're under arrest for suspicious behavior and impersonating military personnel." "What?" Joe said, shocked. "This is real. I am real. Call it in. Call my base. Call the Pentagon." But Brooks wasn't listening. Cold metal cuffs snapped around Joe's wrists. The sound echoed louder than it should have in that quiet morning. As Joe was led to the police car, his eyes looked up at the sky. He thought of the meeting he was missing. He thought of how badly they needed him there. And he wondered one thing. How could wearing his country's uniform still not be enough? What would you have done if you were standing there watching this happen? Would you speak up or stay silent? The back seat of the police car was hard and cold. Sergeant Joe Stevens sat there with his hands cuffed behind him, his uniform wrinkling under his weight. The door shut with a loud slam, and that sound felt heavier than the cuffs. The car pulled away from the gas station, leaving behind confused faces and unanswered questions. Staring out the window, Joe tried to stay calm, but his mind was racing. His phone was still in his pocket, buzzing softly. He knew exactly who was calling. The Pentagon did not wait on anyone. Officer Brooks sat in the front seat, jaw tight, eyes forward. He didn't say a word. "Officer," Joe finally said, his voice steady, "I am scheduled for duty at the Pentagon this morning. They are expecting me." Brooks smirked. "Save it. I've heard all kinds of stories." "This isn't a story," Joe replied. "Check the system. Call it in." Brooks turned the radio on, but didn't say anything. Just noise, static, silence. Then he turned it off again. "You really think someone like you is important enough for the Pentagon? Be quiet." Those words burned more than the cuffs. Joe looked down at his uniform. He had earned every stripe, every medal, every scar, yet here he was, treated like a criminal. At the station, Joe was pulled out of the car and walked inside. The building smelled like old paper and cold coffee. Officers looked up, some frowned, some whispered. No one stepped in. Joe was placed in a holding room, a small one, gray walls, a bench, a camera in the corner. "Sit," Brooks ordered. Joe sat. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The buzzing in Joe's pocket stopped. That worried him more than anything. That meant someone had answered. Elsewhere, far away from that small-town station, the mood was very different. Inside the Pentagon, phones were ringing, doors opened fast. A senior official named Linda Harper stood over a desk, holding a file. "Where is Sergeant Joe Stevens?" she asked. No answer. "He was supposed to be here 30 minutes ago. He never misses." A technician spoke up. "Ma'am, his phone last pinged at a gas station in Oak Street." Linda's face changed. "Get me that town's police department now." Back at the station, Joe heard footsteps. A young officer peeked inside the holding room. "Sir, are you really in the Army?" he said quietly, almost afraid. Joe nodded. "Yes, and they're looking for me right now." Before the officer could reply, a phone rang loudly at the front desk, then another, then another. Officer Brooks picked one up. His face went pale. "Yes, this is Officer Brooks." "Wait, who?" His eyes widened. "The Pentagon?" The room went silent. Brooks stuttered. I didn't know." A loud voice came through the phone. Everyone could hear it. "You arrested an active duty sergeant on official assignment. There are reports of racial abuse. This is now a federal matter." Brooks swallowed hard. At that moment, Joe was uncuffed. The door opened slowly. "Sergeant Stevens," the chief said, voice shaking, "you are free to go." Joe stood up calmly. He adjusted his uniform. He didn't smile. He didn't shout. He simply walked out. As he passed Brooks, Joe stopped and looked at him. "Do you still think people like me can't serve?" he asked softly. Brooks had no answer. "What do you think should happen next? Should an apology be enough, or should there be real consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Sergeant Joe Stevens did not go home after leaving the police station. A black SUV was already waiting outside. Two men in dark suits stepped out. They spoke politely, but their faces were serious. "Sergeant Stevens," one of them said, "we're taking you straight to the Pentagon." Joe nodded and got in. The ride was quiet. Joe looked out the window, watching roads blur past. His hands were free now, but his chest still felt tight. What happened that morning kept replaying in his head. The words, the looks, the cuffs, all of it. At the Pentagon, things moved fast, very fast. Joe was led into a large room with bright lights and long tables. Several officials were already there. Screens on the walls showed photos from the gas station, security camera footage, audio clips, everything. A woman stood up. "I'm Director Elaine Morris," she said. "And first, Sergeant, I want to say this should have never happened." Joe nodded slowly. Elaine pressed a button. Officer Brooks's voice filled the room. "You don't look like a real soldier." People like you don't serve this country." The room went silent. Some people shook their heads. Others clenched their fists. "That," Elaine said firmly, "is racial abuse, and it happened while you were on official duty." Joe finally spoke. "I told him who I was. I showed respect. I did nothing wrong." "And that is clear," Elaine replied. An investigator stepped forward. "We've contacted witnesses, gas station cameras, bystanders, even his own radio logs. Officer Brooks ignored procedure." Another official added, "This wasn't confusion, this was bias." The Pentagon did not waste time. Within hours, federal agents were sent back to that small town. Officer Brooks was removed from duty on the spot. His badge was taken, his gun was taken, cameras flashed as he was walked out of the station he once controlled. People watched in shock. Later that day, Joe stood outside the Pentagon, finally breathing freely. Reporters gathered. "How did this make you feel?" one asked. Joe thought for a moment. It hurt, but it also showed something. The truth always comes out. Behind the scenes, charges were filed. Not small ones, serious ones. Civil rights violations, abuse of power, false arrest. Weeks passed. The courtroom was packed when the trial began. Joe sat quietly in uniform. Brooks sat across the room. No badge, no power. Witness after witness spoke. Video after video played. There was no denying it. The judge looked straight at Brooks. "Your actions were driven by hate, not law." The room held its breath. "What lesson do you think this sends to others in power? Should authority ever be used without respect? Think about it. Share your thoughts below." The courtroom was full long before the judge entered. People sat shoulder to shoulder on hard wooden benches. Some were soldiers in uniform. Some were parents holding their children's hands. Some were reporters holding notebooks ready to write every word. The air felt heavy, like everyone knew this day mattered more than most. Sergeant Joe Stevens sat quietly near the front. His uniform was clean and sharp, just like the day at the gas station. His back was straight, but his heart felt tired. He had not slept much the night before, not because he was scared, but because memories kept returning. The sound of the cuffs, the officer's voice, the looks from strangers who did not know the truth. Across the room sat Daniel Brooks. He did not look like the officer from that bright morning. No badge, no gun, no power. Just a man in a plain shirt, hands folded tightly. His face was pale. His eyes stayed on the floor. Every once in a while he looked up, then quickly looked away again. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The room fell silent as he took his seat. "This court is now session," the judge said. The trial had already shown everything. Video footage played again on the screen. The gas station camera showed Joe standing calmly in uniform. Audio recordings played Brooks's words clearly. There was no confusion, no missing pieces. Witnesses had spoken too. A woman from the gas station cried as she told the court how helpless she felt watching Joe being handcuffed. A young man said he wanted to speak up, but was afraid. Other officers testified that Brooks ignored proper steps and refused to check Joe's identity. The judge looked at Daniel Brooks. "You were trained to protect citizens. Instead, you chose to harm one." Brooks swallowed hard. The judge then looked at Joe. "Sergeant Stevens, you were targeted not because of your actions, but because of who you are." Joe nodded slowly. "The law is clear," the judge continued. "No one is above it, not even those sworn to enforce it." The courtroom felt frozen. "For the crimes of civil rights violations, unlawful arrest, abuse of authority, and racial discrimination," the judge paused between each word, "this court sentences Daniel Brooks to 16 years in federal prison." A sharp gasp moved through the room like a wave. Some people covered their mouths, others lowered their heads. Joe closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell slowly. He was not celebrating, he was releasing pain. Brooks's legs shook. Officers stepped forward and held his arms. He did not resist. He looked up one last time,
eyes full of regret and fear. As he was led away, silence followed him. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright again, just like that morning, but the feeling was different now. Cameras flashed, microphones were raised. Joe stood on the steps, calm and steady. "Do you feel justice was served today?" a reporter asked. Joe took a breath. "Justice doesn't bring back lost peace, but it tells the truth, and the truth matters." Another reporter asked, "What would you say to young kids watching this?" Joe looked straight ahead. "I would tell them that their worth is real. No uniform, badge, or opinion can take that away." People clapped softly. Some cried. Joe walked down the steps, feeling lighter, but also thoughtful. "Now let me ask you, watching this, do you think 16 years is enough for abusing power? Or should the law be even stronger to protect innocent people? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Life slowly returned to normal in the small town on Oak Street, but something had changed. People talked more. They watched more closely. They remembered what happened at that gas station on a bright morning that was supposed to be ordinary. For Sergeant Joe Stevens, life moved forward, but he was not the same man who had stepped out of his car that day. He still wore his uniform with pride. He still served his country, but now his story had become larger than him. Weeks after the trial, Joe stood in front of a group of young soldiers at a training base. They listened closely. Some nodded. Some looked angry. Some looked inspired. Sergeant Joe told them how fear can freeze a person, how staying calm saved his life, how the truth, even when slow, still arrives. One young soldier raised his hand. "Sir," he asked, "were you scared?" Joe paused. Then he answered honestly, "Yes, I was scared, but courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing anyway." Those words stayed with them. News stations replayed the story for weeks. Some people were uncomfortable, others felt hopeful. Parents talked to their kids. Officers across the country sat in training rooms, watching the footage, being reminded of what the badge truly meant. The police department in that small town changed too. New leadership stepped in. Rules were reviewed. Cameras were required at all times. Officers were trained again, this time with one message clear: respect is not optional. Joe visited the gas station one afternoon. Pump number 3 was still there. The owner recognized him and shook his hand. "Thank you," the man said, "for standing." Joe smiled lightly. "Thank you for watching." As Joe walked back to his car, he looked around. Kids laughed nearby. Cars passed. Life continued, but the memory stayed. At the Pentagon, Joe was honored quietly. No big speeches, no medals, just a nod of respect from people who knew what he carried that day. One official said to him, "You reminded us what service really means." Joe drove home that evening under a soft sunset. He thought about how close everything came to going wrong. One decision, one bias, one abuse of power. And yet, justice spoke. Not loudly, not angrily, but clearly. Now let me ask you, watching till the end, if you were at that gas station, would you have spoken up? If you wear power one day, will you use it to protect or to harm? Stories like this don't end in courtrooms. They live in choices we make every day. Joe parked his car, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. The world was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, so was his mind. Because sometimes instant justice doesn't fix everything, but it reminds us that right still matters.